Hey everybody, this is Matthew Pose with Pose Acoustics, and I got another one for you. So this one also claims to be 3 months old. I don't know when my wife printed these, so they may be older. I do apologize for that. But dhong002, who gave a $50 payment for this, said, "Thanks, I have a question. I am preparing to treat my room, a large rectangular open concept townhome floor, half kitchen dining, half living area. So I think we typically call those great rooms, with a media area where I've put a 5.2.4 system, primarily used for theater and immersive audio. I think I have the front rear ceiling figured out thanks to yours and others' videos, but I am unsure about the side walls. The room has 10-foot ceilings, but there are tons of windows and sliding glass doors, so the only available space is pretty high up, 7.5 feet to 10 feet. Would it still make sense to put some absorption there that high up? Would covering them with plates to add diffusion help in the vertical location? Would things be beneficial only on the side close to the theater area or also for the far end? Both, if potentially beneficial for 2D diffusion beyond aesthetics, would consistency of the vertical horizontal orientation of the slat structure matter? Thanks." Okay, so the one thing I got to mention is I suspect from the language in that question that there's some confusion between what is a diffuser and what is an absorber. So a slat panel is not an absorber. I'm sorry, it's not a diffuser. And it's not a diffuser absorber hybrid. It is an absorber, period. It is simply what I would refer to as more of a selective absorber. It doesn't really diffuse. There's probably some very high frequency diffusion slightly, maybe a little bit of scattering, but we wouldn't call it a diffuser because of that. One of the biggest problems with slat panels, actually, which is why they're not diffusers, is that the spacing is perfectly even. And so the reflections off of those wood panels, they're going to follow a pattern, and it's going to create this comb filtering effect. It's not really going to be able to create any kind of diffusion. And as a result, you're going to actually not get a huge benefit in sound from that. That doesn't mean it's bad as an absorber. It just means it's not doing anything as a diffuser. I use them. I like them. I think that the ones that follow more of an MLS pattern are better, but they're hard to get. Okay, so I think the key question here is, what do you do when your sidewalls are nothing but glass up to a certain height? In this case, it looks like 7.5 feet. So he's got between that 7.5 foot point, the top of the windows and doors, and 10 feet, the top. If you put absorption there, does it make a difference? And the answer is absolutely yes. It's going to make a difference. It's going to help reduce the RT60 time, but you're still going to have strong coherent reflections off the glass. So should you do it? Probably. Is it going to be a full fix? Of course not. Now, what can you do? So there's two solutions. One is you can do curtains. They actually make for very good absorbers. You can do roller shades. They're not great absorbers, but with the right materials, they probably would be okay. If you were to use like a wool woven material, which I don't think is very common, as your roller shade material, it probably would offer some decent absorption. It's a product that I've actually thought about making. It's just a matter of figuring out what the material needs to be and how to make it roll up and down correctly. But anyway, that's something you could do. The other way, which is really the better way, I call them totems. I don't know, it's just because some brands had called them that. But you can make freestanding absorber diffuser products that are kind of like a totem. And they could be placed around the room. They could even have wheels on them. I've actually seen people do this where they had a lot of them. And they place them where they want them around the room. And they can be made fairly attractive, so they look almost like a statue, like a piece of artwork in the room. And then, you know, if you need to open up the space, you're having guests over, or you just don't want them there, whatever, you can do that. You can move them around so they're not an issue. So something to keep in mind is it is in fact possible to treat a room, even when you have glass, using these freestanding absorber diffuser products. It's not a terrible idea. Now, putting some sort of like a scatter plate on the absorber, is that a good idea? I think it's always a good idea. You know, sometimes you run into issues where you need more absorption, and that may be taking away some of the absorption you need. The binary plates that RPG referred to as a bad panel, but many other, like Real Acoustics calls them fast panels. Other companies probably have other names for them. The concept behind that was a pseudo-random binary pattern. And that pseudo-random binary pattern that they chose, which was chosen for its behavior in this way, because if you draw like a straight line across or down, you'll hit like a dot only every so often. It makes it so that when sound hits the plate and reflects off, that the sound hitting the plate and reflecting off isn't actually going to be following that kind of a pattern, and it reduces that comb filtering effect. At very, very high frequencies, and I mean very high frequencies, like we're talking above 10 kilohertz, there actually is some diffusion, which is why the bad panel was referred to as a binary amplitude diffuser. But if you actually read the patent and white papers surrounding it, Peter's pretty clear that it's not a diffuser in the sense of a product that's doing a good job diffusing below that. He never thought of it or referred to it as a product that provides any diffusion in that critical 500 hertz to, we'll call it 10 kilohertz range. It's above that range that it provides the diffusion. Now, is that good? I don't really know, actually. There isn't very good research to tell us where the most important range is for diffusion. In fact, if anything, we have good information that suggests our sense of spaciousness and envelopment comes more from having a good diffuse sound field at lower frequencies. So I consider the speech range to be a fairly critical one, and it's the easiest one to diffuse in a typical residential space. So that's that 1 kilohertz to 5 kilohertz range. That's where I want to concentrate a lot of diffusion. That isn't that below 1 kilohertz isn't valuable. It's that the wavelengths are so long that below 1 kilohertz, actually getting meaningful diffusion is difficult. The measurements that have been done on a number of devices that were claimed to work that low seem to suggest that they don't really work that low. The ones that I have seen that do work that low are huge, like 12 to 24 inches deep. Most of you do not have room for a 12 to 24 inch deep diffuser. The other thing I've seen is people trying to do that where they're trying to get good diffusion using Skyline. Something to keep in mind is that the Skyline diffuser doesn't really have the same bandwidth per depth that you get out of a standard QRD with wells. So again, when you look at the actual measurements of these diffusers across different angles, you're going to find that in general, the diffusers, the open well type, the ones that actually don't have wells, I guess, the extruded type, losing my words today, Skyline, there we go. The Skyline type, their bandwidth is pretty limited and they don't go anywhere near as low as you would expect for their depth. So what you have to do is have the wells, but like I said, they actually have to be deeper than you'd think. Like a 4-inch diffuser doesn't really work down to 500 hertz. A 4-inch diffuser works down to around 1 kilohertz. You might see a little bit of diffusion down to 800 hertz or so, but that's about it. A 6-inch diffuser doesn't drop that like a whole octave. It drops it down to maybe, again, like we were at 1,000. So now it's pretty solid down to 800, and you might get a little bit of diffusion down at 600 hertz. So if you have enough of them, it's probably going to add up and have some benefit. You get to like an 8 or 10-inch one, you get to a point where you really need to kind of jump up to 12 inches to get it down where it's solid diffusion at 600 hertz, and then a little bit below that. And then to really see like solid diffusion down to below 500 hertz, you're talking about something that's more than 12 inches, 18 to 24 inches. And there's a couple of problems when diffusers get to be that big. So first, the diffuser is really, really deep. So you're losing like 2 feet of floor space. Second, and more importantly, there's losses in the wells. And those losses in the wells are significant. And so there's little tricks to design them differently that helps, but I've never seen a diffuser that large used in a home theater or a studio, really, for that matter, ever in my life. Where I've seen diffusers that large used is large performance halls and to some extent the live room in studio. So I've never seen them in the monitoring space of a studio, the control room. I've only seen them in the live room, but I have seen them there. So I think to answer your question, I do think some diffusion would be a good idea. I do think some absorption would be a good idea, even in those higher locations. And I think it's worth considering totems. In terms of the orientation for a 1D device, which I think is what you're calling 2D. I know Gramani doesn't like that terminology, but the device that has basically the slats only in one pattern, like vertical versus horizontal instead of both. Those 1D diffusers do need to be oriented in a particular way. So if they're on the side walls, the slats need to go vertically. If you go the other way around, they're not going to be as effective. So I hope that's helpful. I hope I answered your question. I know it's been a long time, and I apologize if this did not get answered, but we are getting through these, and I'll get them out for you. And we should probably do more videos on diffusion and absorption and talking about how they're used. So thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video.